focus on the chat because I feel like this is a bit of a reunion because there's a lot of people here that know and love CTE. So Kate and I are delighted to be here and really want to express our appreciation to NGA. We have had a long-standing partnership with the organization, doing work together on federal policy and state policy and policy academies. And so excited to be able to have the chance to talk about a topic that is near and dear to our heart, but that both organizations are also working on. For those of you who don't know Advanced CTE, we are a membership organization of states that represent the individuals who are in leadership positions for career technical education, spanning all the way back now to upper elementary school, through middle, high school, and post-secondary adult programs. So all 50 states are our members, and as you see on the slide, we are proudly celebrating our 100-year anniversary this year. So didn't get to have the cake this year because no in-person meetings, but I'm still very happy to have that celebration. So Kate and I are going to talk about some work we've done, some assets we've created, and mostly really want to have a discussion with you about where and how we can better leverage the conversations we're all having about helping more individuals kind of find their way back to the workplace and upskill and reskill to living wage careers. And so with that, we'd love to have you just let us know where you're from. So in the chat, if you can kind of say hello and say your name and where you're at, and maybe also kind of what agency, so we get a sense of what perspective and experience you're bringing to the conversation. That would be really great. And so I'll just say a little bit about myself and then turn it over to Kate, who will present. I've been with our organization over 20 some odd years, and my experience in education really is thinking about intersections of education and the workforce, education, economic development. I think CTE sits at that centerpiece. I think it's why we see this opportunity before us in kind of the downturn to be able to really see the role that CTE can play, which sits at the nexus of education, workforce development, economic development, and why we think CTE can really play an important role in this work. So Kate, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and then move along on the presentation. So thanks again, Rachel, for having us.
Great. Thanks, Kim, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're dialing in from. As I'm Kate Kramer, the Deputy Executive Director of Advanced CTE, and have been with the organization a little over 7 years, and have always enjoyed the partnership with NGA, both from here in my previous career or previous positions working in the state policy space and kind of the intersection of college and readiness. So I have the heavy lifting of kind of walking through making the case. I assume that all of you joined today because you believe in CTE, you believe that it has a critical role in the economic recovery strategy, but can I go through quickly some of the different data, some of the different kind of explanations, building that case and really how we are positioning CTE within this space, sharing a couple of state examples, but then as Kim said, kind of really trying to have as much discussion. We're here to learn from you, to understand what connections are being made. If they're not being made, where are places that we, in partnership with NGA and the other partners that are part of this initiative, can be leaning going forward. So we're here to learn just as much as all of you, and really look forward to this opportunity. So briefly, I'm going to talk through the impact of COVID. I think a lot of this is going to be familiar to you, but want to just really focus on a deeper focus of what this recession, this economic downturn means for learners and for our education system. So as we know, COVID, the job loss has been staggering. This number, 40 million, is upwards of now closer to 60 million that of individuals that have filed for unemployment or are getting some sort of pandemic-related relief or assistance. But what's, the fact that this has hit all sectors. I think there's some assumptions about certain sectors have been hit more than others, but we know this has had kind of downstream impacts across the board in terms of the job loss over the past few months. And importantly, as we know, the displacement is disproportionately impacting Black, Hispanic, Latinx individuals, as well as those in the earlier stages of their careers and those with less than a 4-year degree. And what's so critical is not just about the job loss, but also looking at that second column in terms of the pay cuts and the loss of wages. And what's missing from this chart, but I think many of us know, is that women have been disproportionately impacted as well, and particularly women of color. So the intersectionality of who has being left behind, who is having both kind of the dramatic loss of losing a job, but also losing wages that may never recover without some intentionality going forward. And then building on one of the data points from last slide, I know this group is focused on post-secondary in particular, but CT obviously is at kind of the secondary and post-secondary levels. But the importance of looking at the impact on young adults that have been hard hit in this economic downturn. And this is incredibly important because these young adults at the beginning of their career will feel this impact over their lifetime. And one of the major lessons when we look back on the Great Recession was because, in fact, in part because of the lack of investment in career technical education and in some of these earlier people just entering their workforce or in their first couple years in the workforce, we saw in the millennial generation who entered the workforce during the Great Recession have lower levels of home ownership, net worth, and real income compared to previous generations. And because they entered the job market at an unstable time, took lower wages, often were underemployed in that first career, their lifelong earnings are depressed and may never fully catch up. And if we don't really attend to our current younger generation, they will have the same experience that the millennials did. And of course, no surprise, it is disproportionately Black and Latinx young adults are being impacted more greatly than white young adults. As we all know, I mean, there's just so much uncertainty about what the future of jobs and the future of work looks like. Obviously, a lot of these changes were already happening. Automation, a focus on digital skills and competencies, kind of new models of work, but they have been greatly accelerated by this disruption in the past 6 months. And so there's a lot of uncertainty, as you can see, about the jobs that will come back, but also what those jobs will look like. So one estimate from the Philadelphia Reserve Board says that between 30 and 40-ish% of job losses may be permanent. There's other estimates that are much more dramatic at the 60% range. I think this is probably a little bit more realistic. And looking at data from the last recession, which was provided by the White House a few years ago when they were kind of looking at kind of the outcome of the Great Recession, this provides some insight into what we're facing. And it shows that half of displaced workers ended up changing their industry, which we know cannot be achieved without significant upskilling and reskilling. So whether the jobs change or what we certainly know is the different competencies and expectations within those jobs will change, which will put a great tension and importance on getting our education system to be more responsive and focused on the future. Just a couple, obviously Strata Education and Workforce Network has been doing a ton of amazing research over the past few months, kind of weekly surveying. And I think, just a couple of things I wanted to pull out. One is a question about, so you're looking at this economic downturn, you're thinking through the pandemic, can you access the education training that you would want? And what we're seeing is people aren't really sure in terms of the best way to approach that. And even more so among Black, Latinx, and those with less education are just not as sure. Those with advanced degrees, two-thirds of them feel like they know what education and training they need. That's probably not who we need to be most focusing on, myself, and I'm sure many of us on the call, but those that are most vulnerable and will benefit the most from policy and programs that can really lift those. Also from Strata's research, which again, I think really emphasizes the importance of career technical education, is that fewer than a third of adults even know what pathways, skills, and programs are available, which means that we really need to be focusing on that career advisement and guidance and information systems that can drive individuals to the right choice for them based on the skills they're coming with, the passion and interest they have, and the flexibility they may need as we go through the next year or so before we really can be fully back to work in the ways in pre-COVID. So interestingly, as looking at the last economic downturn and kind of conventional wisdom, right, is community college enrollment will increase. And it certainly did across most post-secondary options, according to research from the Community College Research Center at Teachers College at Columbia University. This is particularly true, the focus on those two-year programs and public two-year programs among adults under 24, Latinx individuals, and we also saw an increase in public 4 years, particularly for young Black and Latinx individuals. Now, what's interesting is that there is recent data that just came out a few weeks ago from the National Student Clearinghouse that shows that community college enrollment is actually dramatically down this school year. That being said, we know there's a fundamental difference between this recession and the last recession. Namely, we are still in the middle of a global pandemic. A lot of individuals are concerned about going physically to school for obvious reasons. There's a lot of concerns about online education isn't worth the cost. And as we saw before, a lot of people just don't know where even to find the right information about what those best pathways are. So there's also just so much uncertainty about what the future holds, and many people are just holding on their education plans until they have a better sense of what it looks. We also know many people, including women, are not in a place to be able to go back for education and training because they're still dealing with childcare and other caregiving responsibilities. That just is a dramatically different picture than the last recession. That being said, I think the research community absolutely is predicting that when things stabilize, there will be an increase in community college enrollment going forward. What is concerning though in the short term is that who is opting out, right, of enrollment, and particularly Black and this non-resident aliens, which essentially are kind of non-naturalized citizens, the immigrants from other countries that are kind of choosing most to opt out of this system. So what does this all add up to? And I will again credit the Community College Research Center for kind of pulling together some of this. We had them come and speak to a number of our members a few weeks ago and provide a lot of rich data. So one is with employment up, unemployment up, and wages down, we know there's going to be just less money for individuals to invest in education and training. And I think many people rightly are feeling really very risk averse right now about making major decisions, particularly financial decisions. We do know, and we're hearing this certainly among secondary students as well as adult learners, that there's a real focus on getting those marketable and transferable skills, focusing on what are those recession-proof jobs and opportunities, and then wanting to move in those directions and focus more on skill-based training than a bachelor's degree without a real kind of intent or purpose. We're definitely going to be, and we saw this in the past 2 decades, a lot more competition, especially in the online space, from both public and private providers. And that's going to be something that I think from a public policy standpoint is going to need a lot of attention, as it has over the past decade, to make sure that particularly those most vulnerable are not being taken advantage of as we move forward. And then as I'm sure many of you are acutely already experiencing, budgets are going to be very tight, and we're going to have to make really difficult decisions about where we're putting our public dollars in terms of program, learner support, tuition assistance, to make, and really looking forward where we can be braiding funding and creating more economies of scale. So why curtail education? Why are we here today? And how does CTE fit within all of this? And why, from hopefully our perspective and hopefully your perspective as well, why does it need to be part of a state's economic recovery strategy? So as hopefully you all know, it's a dedicated federal funding stream, about $1.3 billion in federal dollars. Obviously a lot more goes in from the state level that is focused explicitly on building and scaling these career-focused pathways that are designed with and for industry. The reach is wide. Our programs are reaching about 12 million students, including 3.5 million post-secondary and adult learners. And we have positive outcomes, stronger for CT students that are kind of counted within the Perkins accountability system than kind of the national averages, particularly when you look at kind of credential attainment and retention and transfer. And these are data, I will say this is from the 2018 school year, so obviously preceding where we are at now. Unclear what the last year is going to mean for our data. I think that's just something everyone is going to be struggling with in terms of the disruption of the last school year, in terms of being able to collect. States are also transitioning from Perkins 4 to Perkins 5. So we're optimistic that our outcomes will stay, but I did want to kind of put that caveat out there that this is pre-COVID data. But we know that these are much higher than kind of the averages when you look across community college students in terms of how they're earning those credentials and if they're either continuing on or transferring out. It's critical, and I think this is what differentiates CTE from a lot of other workforce programs, is that they are designed to be anchored in high demand careers, but also on high skill and high wage. And this means that they're reflective of what industry needs and where the opportunities are, but also take into account the importance of learners landing a good job, not just an available job. And taking both the short view and that long view of what do employers need now, but also what is the 10-year projection, so that we're preparing students not just for today or tomorrow, but for lifelong success. And then finally, there has been in the past decade, if not longer, as CT has grown momentum, grown in quality, grown in stature, and increased enrollment, that there is increased focus on aligning CT with the broader talent pipeline development opportunities. So for example, this past year, we actually, Advanced CT collaborated with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation to build out assets and tools and resources to ensure that CT is part of their talent pipeline management initiative, where they bring together collaboratives of employers to really look at what their needs are and then source them from the greatest places of talent or developers of talent, and having secondary and post-secondary CTE as part of that strategy. And there's some great models across the country of strengthening those partnerships. Finally, why CTE and why CTE now is that we are in a great moment of opportunity as states are now pivoting towards implementing their new Perkins 5 state plans. So, and that importantly has really pushed us forward in terms of focusing on equity, equitable access, and outcomes for learners across all subgroups as well as special populations. So Perkins 5, or the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, which was reauthorized back in 2018, all state plans were submitted and approved over the summer and now are being implemented, had a number of really important provisions that state didn't just work to meet the minimum of, but really took advantage of to advance their systems forward, to not just continue the work that they had been doing to focus on quality programs, but really on that emphasis on equity. And so part of that is there's a lot more data collection, disaggregation to better understand the equity gaps and opportunity gaps across subgroups, which are essentially race, ethnicity, and gender, as well as all of these special populations, which align with the WIOA special populations categories and are a much extended list of a number of learners that we've never had to explicitly attend to before. There's required supports that need to be kind of tied to them. There's an expanded access on recruitment and retention. There is an investment, as I said, on data, but then using the data through process like a local needs assessment that then actually feeds into how local districts and institutions have to spend their dollars to make sure that they're reaching students, closing equity gaps, and having a broader equity strategy in place. And then finally, not as much on equity, but there was a much stronger emphasis on labor market alignment. That's always been part of CT and Perkins' mission, but really double down in Perkins 5 that we think, has and will ensure that there is more responsiveness in the programs. And again, that's part of that local needs assessment process that district institutions have to look at their labor market information, have to work with workforce and economic development and employers, and then have to provide evidence that their programs are in fact aligned with those high skill, high wage and demand, and then have their money, dollars flow to support those programs that have that labor market alignment. So just, I wanted to share a few examples of how states have been, in our one stimulus package, how they have been directing some of their CARES Act funding, and in cases, the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund to explicitly support CT programs, learners, and facilities. And this is critical because CT does require additional attention and investments to ensure that its programs can run and operate effectively and equitably during COVID. Given it's generally very hands-on, there's a lot of lab-based work. There's a very heavy emphasis and expansion of work-based learning in the past few years in the CT program, and certainly accelerated by Perkins 5. As well as there are a number of standalone institutions that serve CT students outside of high schools, outside of community technical colleges that require some additional attention that may not fall within the standard distribution of resources otherwise. So Florida is one state that has gone kind of very heavily and has released over the summer, released 2 discretionary grants through the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. One, which was rapid credentials. You can kind of read about it here. I won't just read the slide, but really focused on those kind of short-term, high-value credentials that can articulate into other degree programs that can be really getting people back to work as quickly as possible, and kind of given a lot of flexibility to the institutions in terms of what that need is. It could be for sitting for the credentialing. It could be for the equipment needed to actually train and assess those students, or for the programs themselves. And I think it's super interesting that they did require a 25% match, which could come from Perkins, WIO, or other sources. So kind of asking for a little bit more skin in the game. The other one, which I didn't put here because it's more a secondary focus, is $11 million into building K-12 CT infrastructure capacity and completion, which were infrastructure and equipment grants for K-12 schools or technical colleges that serve secondary students through dual enrollment or other means that can support their in-demand CT programs of study. Just quickly, a few more. Utah is expanding its Learn and Work in Utah program, which provides tuition assistance for short-term training programs. They poured some of their CARES money into this, and I think that it's great that it's some of you probably are familiar with this, but that is a great partnership between the governor's office, Talent Ready Utah, as well as the system of higher education. So really an opportunity to bring those different players together. South Dakota, this is pretty new. They actually launched a new effort called Upskill that is focused specifically for adult learners to get them reskilled and back into the workforce. They've identified 24 certificates that are based on like in-demand, high-demand fields across 9 career clusters. All of them articulate into 2- and 4-year degrees, and 100% are offered online. And then finally, Pennsylvania is another state pretty early on. They have a very strong set of what they call their career technical centers. These are primarily they're designed as part of the secondary system, but the majority do serve post-secondary adult learners as well, either after hours, on weekends. They kind of serve as another place where individuals can get training, and particularly upskilling and reskilling, which is kind of how a lot of these centers are often used. And they put $10.5 million to these, recognizing their specific costs associated with the facilities, and as I mentioned earlier, to make sure that they can continue to have a continuity of service and supports for learners over the summer and beyond. So super briefly, I know I'm coming up on time. I know that Amanda and Rachel were kind enough to share the link found here to a number of the resources that we created earlier. And I'll just say, we thought it was critically important because, as we mentioned before, in the past, CTE was not part of economic recovery strategies. It was just kind of, as it's always been, siloed, put to the side. The focus appropriately was on workforce development, upskilling, reskilling. From our perspective, and hopefully as you can see from this data, CTE is part of that solution, right? And increasingly, it's hard to pull those systems apart. And so rather, our perspective is be intentional about where those opportunities for connections, collaborations, braiding of funding, braiding of services, which will only become more important as budgets get cut, as enrollments get shaky until we have a sense of what this is going to look like. And so that's why we really decided to create a number of assets to kind of define where and how CTE should be part of this recovery, and arm our members and other CTE advocates with tools they can be using in the field to build awareness of the importance of this and help make the case. So you can find all of them on this website. Briefly, we've got some fact sheets, both of the secondary and post-secondary, having attention on both. Again, I know this is post-secondary. My hill to die on is the investment in secondary CTE, because I just think about all those students who are going to be graduating into this volatile and really scary job market, and making sure that they have the supports, information, guidance, tools they need to make the most informed choice about their next step, and we don't leave another generation behind. But of course, post-secondary is what we're here to talk about, and the importance of upskilling and reskilling, which we also can't think about those millions of adults that obviously need critical support. We have a video. I am not gonna show it. I am gonna show it. Am I gonna show it? Should I show it? Okay, I am gonna show it. All right, here we go.
Changing rapidly. This is especially true for our nation's labor market and economy. More people are out of work than we've seen in some time, and our communities of color have been hit especially hard as unemployment has soared. It's hard to imagine that in today's world, one event could do this much to shake us. We will get through it. Some careers will come back as they were before, but many others will be eliminated or forever changed, which causes us to wonder, what will work look like in the future? And how do we prepare for that future? The answer is already in place. Career Technical Education, or CTE. CTE has a long history of preparing learners, no matter their age, race, ethnicity, gender, or where they live, with the skills needed for success in high-skill, high-wage, and in-demand careers. In these times of uncertainty, CTE is more important than ever for both learners and employers. Today, CTE serves nearly 3 million post-secondary learners. Our post-secondary and workforce programs equip them with the skills they need to adapt and thrive as the world of work changes. Through CTE, learners are reskilled or upskilled so they can get back to work, advance along a career path, or transfer their skills to a new industry. In fact, 86% of adult CTE learners either continue in their education or are employed within 6 months of completing their program. We're also vital to employers because we provide a pipeline of talent. Our programs stay responsive to the always changing needs of the labor market because they are developed with direct input and guidance from industry partners. No matter if it's changing technologies.
Oh, I very sorry.
Or a global pandemic, the ways we work are always evolving, and so are the skills people need to be an indispensable part of the workforce. Employers will continue to innovate to function in a more virtual world, and they will be looking to hire individuals with enduring and transferable skills. No matter what, our learners will be ready. CTE has been and will continue to be a sound investment. As our workforce and economy recover, we will be at the foundation, supporting learners, delivering skills, meeting employer demands to keep us all moving forward. The world.
Great. All right. Sorry. You think like 7 months in, we'd all just be Zoom experts and there'd be no clicking around. Anyway, the last resource I just want to share is we did put together a promotional toolkit that has graphics, it has social media posts, it has some talking points, as well as some other resources to help advocates unpack, talk about, share out resources. So again, all this can be found at careertech.org/advocate. With that, we're gonna stop our talking at you, and I turn over to Kim to lead us in a discussion.
Great, thanks, Kate. And thanks. I think probably a lot of what Kate shared are things that we've been hearing in kind of all the places, so I appreciate you kind of putting it together in one place. And we certainly believe that there's a compelling case to have kind of CTE at the table. I will say that when we talk to our members, the state CTE directors who are housed in a variety of different state agencies across the country, we know that is not necessarily the case in all of these discussions. And so we probably have a group of folks that are here that are probably doing more with CTE, so not necessarily a representative group, but wondering if you in the chat, and we've been doing this thing called a chat storm where I'm gonna ask a question and you're gonna type the answer, everybody type the answer in the chat, and then when we do the countdown, everybody hits send at the same time. So the question that I have for those of you on the call is, so is CTE currently part of your state's economic recovery strategy? So if you can write yes, no, I don't know, and hold, and then I will give you a second to put your answer in, and then we'll do the countdown and kind of see where we're looking at. All right, it shouldn't take long to put in your answer, so I'll do 3, 2, 1, hit send. And it looks like we have a lot of yeses, a couple of I don't know, so that's great. So I'm gonna maybe ask somebody, first open it up, and then if nobody wants to volunteer themselves, I will pick on somebody. But somebody who said yes, anybody want to share kind of how CTE is at the table in the economic recovery conversations and work that you're doing in your state? Volunteers? I was never a teacher, but I know the awkward silence trick, so.
Hey, I'm happy to
Great, thanks, Delaney.
Sure, from Washington State. So we have a workforce development chapter that we've developed of our state's economic recovery plan. And we kind of started with what are the industry sectors that either have growth jobs now or are likely to, and we were really focused on livable wage jobs. And as we looked at those and then looked at who was being left behind, we said we need to have pathways for so many more people, because the two sectors that came up as having statewide growth are IT and healthcare. And, you know, obviously there are traditional four-year college routes for those. But when you're looking at the folks who have been dislocated and who are the least likely to be reemployed, to get them in there, they need to be working and learning, and there need to be pathways, and they need to be able to earn credit for work-based learning. And all of that just leads to CTE. You know, the other thing is that we have a lot more younger people that have been dislocated in this recession than in the past, many of them still high school age. So we wanted to make sure that secondary CTE was engaged with us as well as post-secondary CTE.
Thanks, Lainey.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think this conversation, Kate and I kind of keep going around and around. I know she said it is like, there is this immediate focus of kind of the people who are unemployed today, but there is a pipeline issue also. And part of the reason that we got to the skills gap that we had in the last kind of 5-7 years that we've been dealing with is because we didn't attend to the pipeline during the last recession. So I think there's the urgency of post-secondary adult, but not forgetting that pipeline and those who are on the cusp, right, of making that transition from high school into the workplace or into post-secondary now. So thanks so much. Anybody else want to volunteer?
Hi, Kimberly. This is Angela from Arkansas. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Good. We've been really active as a state. We formed together a team and we're working with the National Governors Association. And so we've pulled in various partners from the two-year technical, two-year secondary centers, the community colleges, Arkansas Economic Development Association and Council, and then also the governor's office and other Department of Workforce Services, really trying to look at what could this ecosystem of recovery in Arkansas look like. And so some of it has been, really taking an asset inventory of who's doing what programs, what are the funding sources, and then how can we streamline that into some accelerated programming, and then also just kind of rethinking what's happening at what level. And so there's a lot of creative thoughts, and we're still working through that with the National Governors Association, setting our top priorities about what we can do to really focus on some key high need areas right now that we could fill as quickly as possible. What credentials can we focus on? Where CTE can step in and help with some of the students that are especially towards that, as Kate was mentioning, that age group where they may still be in high school, but they're leaving through the day and have that opportunity where they could be working and upskilling through that time. So really just some exciting things happening. And really for us, it's pushing the conversation. We found that as we were on the reskilling call with NGA, it was really starting to mesh together with the NGA call on work-based learning, because the conversations are not two separate conversations. We found the more we were digging in that they really are hand in hand. And so with CTE, the importance of work-based learning and making sure that we're aligning with what's happening next step with the adult that's unemployed, that needs to be upskilled, and how our systems fit within those systems. So a lot of really, really great robust conversations and moving that into actionable things that we can put into practice as quickly as possible. So I'm just really appreciative of my team, and I see multiple people on the call that are on that state group, and just look forward to seeing what Arkansas will come out stronger in our recovery.
Great, thanks, Angela. I think one of the things that can come out of a crisis is the disruptive innovation to kind of bring people together in a new way to solve a problem. And it sounds like your state is really doing great work of that systems alignment, which I think is difficult work to do, and kind of we're all in our silos, and that this takes kind of us coming together toward a single focus to kind of solve these problems. So thanks so much. Do we have one other state that wants to share what they're doing? How CTE is involved and at the table?
Hi, Kim. This is Morna Foy from Wisconsin.
Good. I have time though, because you were the person I was going to pick if nobody picked up. So there you go. Thank you.
A lot of the pathway work, the stackable credentials, the short-term training, I really feel like we were on that road prior to the pandemic. Mm-hmm. We have great partnership with our Department of Workforce Development, and I think there's just been, over the last decade, really a growing appreciation for CTE, although, to be honest, we've always enjoyed a pretty positive and special place in our state government and in our workforce development efforts, really great relationships with employers. The one thing the pandemic has brought up two issues for us. One is it's really nice to see like our Department of Economic Development or it's really a quasi-public private partnership kind of an agency. They have been doing some reporting out to the legislature about the state's pandemic response. And they've included education as a equal sort of strategy, along with the more traditional economic development grants to companies, concerns about small businesses, concerns about rural areas, broadband access. Education is another, in their minds now, that's a strategy. And the career and tech ed and the two-year colleges are an important part. So we're not just an afterthought anymore. I think there's just been a real appreciation of the local nature of our institutions and the way that CTE provides advantages for all sorts of learners at different ages. And also an appreciation of how the pandemic and some of the reasons that Kate went through, which I really appreciated. I'm going to use your slides. I had to do an interview on this topic a couple of weeks ago, and I wish I'd had your stuff with me at the time. But regardless, I think that there's a real appreciation now for how the pandemic has made that process more complicated. And so that's one thing that I think is we're still trying to figure out here is we've been moving forward on some pretty big initiatives on how to expand the population that can benefit from CTE, particularly incarcerated, people coming out of the foster care systems, and that all of our dual enrollment, as you know, we do just thousands of credits worth of, tens of thousands of credits worth of dual enrollment every year with our high school populations. All of that activity has been really constricted by the pandemic because we can't get into the correctional system institutions right now. No access to those students. So then you have to figure out an internet option, which is got other issues. Same with going to high school right now is really tough, especially if you're doing it 100% online. And so to add that additional layer of college level coursework, usually more accelerated, can't be done hands-on necessarily, which is, of course, it's a big advantage for a lot of students. So I don't think we've had the impact that some other states have had in terms of really accelerating their interest and effort behind the stackable credentials and the work-ready credentials. We were already there, I believe, in Wisconsin, but it has really affected the application of those strategies to different population groups going forward. And we're talking about the need to use a lot more virtual technology, which is very expensive, and the fact that we might be in these financial constraints for, that's not going to end just because we get a vaccine.
Right.
So even though we might get the access, we are not necessarily going to have the tools to keep moving forward on some of these projects that we've been really excited about. So that's the topic where we're talking about in our state. It's why our latest workforce development reports and the budget that the governor is putting together, broadband is a huge part of that, because it's our inability to have that kind of access to, you can have home service, but if it still might not be enough to actually get virtual quality, which is really what we need at the post-secondary level to do CTE. We can do amazing things, but it's not cheap.
Yeah, there's so many things wrapped up in your answer, Morna. And I think, one of the great strengths for CTE are those relationships, right? I mean, they've built relationships with their local employer community. Those are sound. When we're hearing that one of the challenges is when, employers are uncertain about their future, how and where do they have capacity now to still have that relationship with the institutions. And so like we're actually going to be, we have some funding from the Siemens Foundation that does research on perceptions of CTE. And thankfully, we're going to be adding in an employer survey that will release the findings next spring of kind of like wondering about kind of what is the long-term impact of COVID on the ability to have the relationship. Do they have the bandwidth to give? What is happening with work-based learning? Kind of, I know Oklahoma yesterday was telling us they are shifting to kind of large-scale work-based learning, but they're doing it more on the career exploration end of things, not really the career preparation end of things. And so like, that's okay for that pivot for a certain period of time. Like, that's great. But if you can get people like focus on what they want to do, but we actually have to get them prepared to do the work. And so the second thing I heard from you, which is actually a question I'd love to talk about with the whole group, is, are these issues of equity? And that kind of, I think what the pandemic has shown us, a number of Kate's slides showed us, is that, the effect of what's happening in our country is not even. And the systemic issues that we've dealt with now, just those cracks got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so wondering kind of, as you're doing the work that you're doing, are there any special kind of intersections of the work in terms of prioritization or focus on making sure that the populations and communities that are hardest hit are getting kind of the extra effort and support that they need to be able to make sure that the citizens can kind of return to work? I know we were on a call where Washington was talking about having a human-centered kind of poverty reduction approach, and bringing the individuals who are those who we serve to the table to help craft solutions, which I thought was really a great solution. So anybody have anything on that front of thinking about the intersection of your work around equity, whether that's poverty, whether that's race, and kind of the conversation we're having today?
This is Nick in Alabama, and so for our talent development strategy, CTE is at the center, and we have a two-pronged career pathway approach. One is focused on our in-school youth and secondary CTE learners, and the second prong is focused on adult learners who also need to be co-enrolled in post-secondary CTE, and we're focusing on the ability to benefit program of those individuals. And at the secondary level, we're also weaving in WIOA Title I services, and we're focusing on human services and beginning to provide wraparound services through WIOA and through Title IV rehab services. But what we did from the formative level was, in our 2020 WIOA plan, we included Perkins and combined the populations with barriers to education workforce training for Perkins 5 and WIOA. And then the governor set goals for each of those populations that then became the denominator for our WIOA performance indicators. So that created a more direct outreach approach rather than waiting for folks to show up. So that has really set us up. We're not going to rest on our laurels yet, but it's given a lot of urgency within the public workforce system and the CTE system to meet the needs of people in the COVID-19 environment. And so that effort of combining the approach to addressing barriers of those facing, whether it's entering education or the workforce, from an equity perspective has begun to pay some dividends in regard to us being able to pick back up our labor force participation rate somewhat more robustly than we would have expected otherwise.
Great, thanks, Nick. That's great. Really, the idea of braiding together kind of the supports, not just the educational or training delivery, but recognizing that the solutions need to be kind of social services and transportation and food insecurity, and housing. It is a kind of comprehensive set of supports that are needed. Anybody else want to share on this intersection, what you're doing around equity and closing workforce gaps? Jay Ramsey in Vermont, anything you want to share?
Well, I just put in the chat that Vermont's our governor decided that his gear funds, the gear funds for the governor, would be directed to secondary CTE centers, which is we have a regional system, so it would be directed out to those centers to help respond to the needs created by the pandemic. And we had two kind of drivers in the formula to get the funds out. One looked at poverty, which we borrowed from Perkins. And the second, our Department of Public Service had created a survey of broadband internet access, and people could go and say whether they did or didn't have internet access. And we used that data to create an additional measure to help direct funds to those communities that most needed it, to be able to provide internet access or computers or whatever was needed in those areas. It's a lot of money, and we're just starting to have the application available for those communities.
Great, thanks, Jay. I know this issue of broadband access intersects with a question I think that Amanda asked earlier, which is kind of more broadly thinking about kind of the overall response by CTE to kind of what we're facing and how people are reopening programs. Morna talked about the value of kind of hands-on learning, and we are definitely seeing people think about and make the pivot to virtual reality, augmented reality. We're also seeing, and Kate, I'll ask you, because I know you helped to create a reopening tool on this, seeing there being kind of hybrid approaches to having certain kids like rotating through labs at a certain cadence, even when the rest of the school systems might not be open, really being attentive to like numbers of students. So it is certainly not easy. And we know there are many vendors that are now kind of showing their wares, and like we're trying to help the field kind of look and go like what's real, what's valuable, what isn't, because there's lots and lots and lots of people who have their shiny solutions out there. But Kate, anything from your perspective when you did the reopening tool you want to talk about in terms of the pivots you're seeing people make to how to deliver high quality CTE in this environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same issues that we're seeing across both the secondary and post-secondary. Obviously, community and telecolleges were a little bit more prepared, given the structure of the courses. Many had moved into online. Still, obviously, a lot of challenges and barriers. I think secondary, particularly, this was just so far away, and the needs of the learners was obviously so much greater. So I think a number of the things that Kim mentioned, I mean, I think trying to close out last year of how do we make sure that students are completing their clinical hours, how do we make sure they're able to sit for their credentials, and kind of complete their program so they could go on to graduate. And so kind of put some efforts into, we'll open the school one day, certain days a week, only for them to come in. Looking at, we saw quite a few states redirect some of their CARES dollars and Perkins dollars, frankly, as well over the summer to provide some transportation, kind of pay for teachers and other instructors to stay within schools over the summer, kind of be 12 months to be able to close some of those gaps, as well as, obviously creating curriculum materials, sending out kits that they could be doing some of the hands-on. The challenge is a lot of the strategies, I think, exacerbate a lot of our equity issues in terms of, great, you can work in your house, I'm in a manufacturing program or I'm an automotive program, and I can work on my car, I can tinker with my HVAC system. That is not something that's available, obviously, equitably across all students, all populations, depending on where you live, depending on what your family circumstances are. I think the challenge we have, and this is both secondary and post-secondary, is we don't really know the impact yet. We don't have data from the end of last school year. We don't yet have data for this school year. We're expecting it to be lagged. Anecdotally, we're hearing enrollment is down, much like we're seeing in the student clearinghouse data, but we really just don't know yet, which I think makes the importance of having these conversations, thinking about how do we shore this up in the future, rather than kind of waiting a couple of years and then trying to retroactively kind of reinvest in our system is so important. But I think, and obviously as the other pieces, as we all know, it looks dramatically different across our states. And so there are some states where it has not, and some communities where it has not changed at all, and some where it is obviously a dramatic shift in what they're able to do and who they're able to serve. Kim, you're muted.
Sorry, my coworker was barking, so I had to shut the phone off for a little bit. So I think one of the other things that Kate mentioned that I wanted to point to is that we're also starting to hear, and I think this is a place when you think about kind of your sphere of influence of programs being shut down because CTE is more expensive. And so we're saying, like, you know, when you're in a budget crisis, just shut that down because it's an elective, or it is the enrollments are starting to go down, or it's hard to think about reopening because of the hands-on component. And yet we know the case is made, I think, for how important these are. And so as we think about kind of how we can help to make sure that we're not making these false choices. And most of those decisions are made at the local level. They're not made, I think, at the state level, but I think the influence and impact that kind of leadership can have at the state level of shining the light on the priority of these programs, really important, especially as we kind of move ahead. So I'm wondering, and I know many of you said the answer was yes, CTE is at the table. Not everybody answered the question. And so I'm wondering if there's any brave souls that want to share the flip side of that. Or I know somebody said, well, sort of, but not really, is kind of wondering about the why of why maybe CTE isn't at the table, so that we can help kind of understand that side of the decision making and maybe help to think about how we can build assets to change that mindset. So anybody want to share that?
Yeah, I'm one of the people who put sort of in, and I'm Kelly Taylor White from Louisiana, and I am the director of the Workforce Investment Council. And to give tech context to why I said sort of, CTE is definitely in the discussion, but I don't know that CTE holds as firm of a place in the plans as I would like to see, and as some others would like to see, because it's taken for granted that, well, yeah, we're training kids. We're always training kids, so that's really not related to what's currently going on. But there are a group of us who are definitely trying to firm up the position of CTE in the greater scheme plans. And I think that is now switching and doing a pivot in our state due to our attainment goals, due to our non-traditional credentials or non-degree credentials discussions that have always been going on in the background, but that are now coming to the foreground because all of the puzzle pieces, due to the earthquake and shimmying that COVID has caused, it's causing all of these puzzle pieces that have been operating in silos, or not necessarily in silos, but autonomously, to all of a sudden kind of shimmy in and fit into a larger puzzle that others are finally being able to see the larger picture. So that's why I say sort of. As I said, it's there, the discussions have always been going on, but they have not been interlinked with the plans up until very recently. I hope that helps.
That does help. And we've heard that from some other states, is saying, like, we're focusing on the healthcare needs, but they don't connect that to CTE. So there's also kind of some of those disconnects. Well, I am mindful of time, and I know Kate and I could stay on the line forever because we obviously love talking about these things, but we don't have forever. So Kate, do you want to pull up the slide and we can just kind of share a few things and things we wanted you to know that are coming that might be of help and of interest to you, and then also our contact information. So at the end of this month, we have dug into all of the Perkins 5 plans, whether they were combined plans with WIOA or self-standing plans, and we'll be doing kind of an analysis and sharing a release of that, really not just kind of what was in the plans, but holding the plans kind of against a set of metrics that we define as kind of what are high quality implementation strategies. So we'll be having that at the end of the month. We have also been doing some research around area technical centers. So these are institutions that kind of originally served only secondary students, but in 32 states they exist, and they are in this kind of middle ground space of providing non-degree post-secondary credentials in 20 of those 32 states. So we are interested in kind of learning more about these institutions because there are over 1,400 of them. And when we think about kind of public assets to better align and meet the needs that we've just been describing, we think these are probably underutilized assets that can complement and support the community and technical college systems in the country. So very, very interested in sharing that out. And if you're interested to know if your state has them, please let me know. I'm happy to share that, and we can share the listing of them for your state as well. NGA, along with a number of other state-facing organizations, was a partner of ours in coming up with a shared vision for the future of career technical education. And the vision is usually very bold and aspirational. And our hope is that it puts a benchmark down for kind of what we might aim for working together across all of the systems of education and workforce development. And obviously, in some ways, the conversations that we had this fall that are guiding into the vision will be very much influenced by kind of the pandemic and the disruptive opportunities that came out of what we're facing as a country. So that vision will be released. And then earlier I mentioned that survey of employers that will release in April. And we'll also be doing a nationally representative survey of parents and students that's more focused on the K-12 that will complement this employer survey. So those are all coming. And if you care about CTE, we thought you would want to know about them. So last slide is just our contact information, I think. So we'll share this slide deck with Rachel to get out. So, but you can reach us if you've got questions or want to share more good things that you're doing. We really appreciate the time and partnership and all the good work that you're doing. As we said, it's going to take all of us working together to get through this. So thank you so much for allowing us to join you. So Rachel, turn it back to you.
Thanks so much. And I speak for everyone, definitely, when we say thank you, Kim and Kate, for joining. This was a wonderful discussion. Love the interactivity and participation. We will see the network folks next week for our bi-weekly call, which will be on rapid reskilling, shortening the length between entering and exiting a training program. Jen, do you want to say anything on that, or just, okay, great. We'll be sending out the agenda for that next week. That'll be led by AACC. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next week. Thanks all.